Good morning / afternoon, AP Gov students. This is Mr. Bell. I'm going to be coming at you with another lesson. We're going to move on to Unit 18, which talks a lot about government regulation, and I'll go through that with you. I'll go through the notes on screen share. Remember to be studying your court cases, looking back over your vocabulary, doing the Quizlet at the top of Canvas, and most importantly, watching all these videos that get you through the rest of the material that we would have covered in class. I'm going to be able to go back over some of this stuff, but probably not all of it. So I'll also be shooting you guys some review videos for earlier units. So thank you for click and play. Thank you for listening. Hopefully you're using your class time wisely. Bring headphones to class every day this week so that you can watch these videos in class and get some quality class time. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Hope your week's going well. I'm a little bit more well rested this time. We're in the morning, so maybe this will be better than yesterday's video. Speaking of yesterday's video on the Unit 17 presentation, there was a bit of a problem with the processing on YouTube's end. I think it cut off maybe like 15 minutes of it. So no worries. I'll cover that stuff at the end of that lesson when I get back. So here we go. Let's go on to Unit 18 of AP Gov. Here we go. Pulling up the notes now. Okay, so first of all, we're talking about regulations. One of the number one things you need to know about government regulations is that Democrats push these, right? Republicans cut these. Too much regulation is bad. Too little regulation is bad. Too little regulation by Republicans can lead to corruption, can lead to economic collapses, as led up to the Great Depression. Too much regulation by, let's say, Barack Obama in his first term kills manufacturing jobs. An example of that would be the EPA putting all these restrictions on these plants, and those plants having to cut workers' salaries and jobs in order to pay to make sure they are following these restrictions, either paying for lawyers, paying for legal fees, or just paying someone a full-time position to make sure regulation is being met. All right, this section talks about public policy, 18.1. So public policy is basically the process of implementing law that benefits or is supposed to benefit the entire public. So public policy, specific course of action taken by the government to achieve a public goal. Policy agenda, what do we want to get out of this policy? Okay, so your policy agenda, I'm going to go to this next slide. It helps a little bit more to explain this. So here you go. This is the policy making process. This is basically a thought process that comes into play before we ever try to put something through the House, the Senate, or think about writing an executive order. So look at these. Make an assumption, pick a problem. Do we act? How much do we act? How do we act? What are the rules? So let's use the ACA, or Obamacare Affordable Care Act here. Our assumption, if we look at step one, is that, and it says the world. Here we're just going to focus on the U.S. since this isn't foreign policy. So let's make an assumption about the U.S. that the healthcare system as is broken. All right. That is an assumption. We need to look into that. All right. Two, pick a problem. This is going to be multiple problems. What problems do we have with the healthcare system prior to ACA? Now, I'm looking at this as Barack Obama and his team would have looked at it. Okay, one, insurance companies could neglect people with pre-existing conditions. That's one big thing. Kids were kicked off of their parents' health insurance way too early, considering how the economy was after the Great Recession. So I just picked two problems there. Discriminating against pre-existing conditions and kids not being able to be on their parents' health insurance long enough. Three, are we going to act at all? You got to think before you act on policy, what are the repercussions? How's it going to affect the economy? But most importantly, how's it going to affect you if you're running for re-election? Barack Obama risked not being re-elected to pass Obamacare. 4, how much are we going to do? Is this going to be a little bit of adjustment to the healthcare system like Bush does with Medicare Part D when he expanded the number of prescription drugs that could be paid for by Medicare and expanded the amount that would be paid for? Or is this going to be an overarching like rehaul of the American healthcare system? That's what Obamacare was. So a Republican, when making policy, they're going to act not as much or as hands-on as a Democrat would. 5, how are we going to do this? What's our tool? All right, in this case, it was regulation with Obamacare. It was forcing people to have health insurance. It was taking money from their taxes if they don't. So that's a tool. You say you're going to take people's money, they're usually going to listen. 6, make rules for implementation. So once this is passed the House, the Senate, and Obama signed it, again, talking about ACA here as our example for policymaking process, what are the rules for implementation? We don't want to implement too fast because that could shake the economy, that could shake the status quo domestically in this country, but we don't want to act too slow either. So when Obamacare was passed when was it passed? 2011, this whole thing is not going to be implemented to 2020. And Obama smartly implemented the good parts first because you guessed it, he wanted the good things to be able to be campaigned and him to advertise them as he ran for re-election in 2012 with Barack Obama. So, as Barack Obama ran for re-election in 2012 against Mitt Romney. Okay. So what are the rules for implementation? Who's going to be implementing it? There's a lot of people that implement Obamacare, whether it's the IRS making people pay taxes if they don't. And again, that's the government bureaucracy at work in number 6, whether it's the IRS making people pay taxes or tax penalties if they don't have health coverage, or if it's Health and Human Services, making sure that people's health needs are met by the law. So let's go back to that last slide here. Public policy, that's the course of action. That would be Obamacare. Policy agenda, what's the goal of this? The agenda is to make the healthcare system better. You could take this and apply it to anything, whether it's No Child Left Behind, whether it is the Patriot Act, whether it is the Defense of Marriage Act, which is a Bill Clinton thing, any of that stuff. So let's keep going here. Okay, we're going to talk about some cause and reasons for regulation and as they happen throughout American history. All right, the Sherman Antitrust Act outlawed monopolies and trust. The reason why is because in a capitalist society like we have in America, the number one goal is competition. To have competition, you have to have a free market. So we know how this works, okay? We want, I always use the example of a hamburger, so I'm going to use the example of shoes here. We want the best shoes for the best price. So therefore, we want brands to be able to compete. So Nike competes, Under Armour competes, Adidas competes, Jordan brand competes, KD's compete. Okay, all these different shoe companies competing, they're either trying to offer you the best price, the best product, or usually a mix of both. They're not going to go too cheap because they want to offer you a quality product and still turn a profit. If anything is going to limit those type of competitive markets in the United States, that's where the Sherman Antitrust Act comes into play. It outlaws monopolies and trust. Okay, so what's the difference between the two? A monopoly is when you only have one person providing the product. So that would be Microsoft in the 90s. Windows was the only OS or operating system in the 90s because Apple hadn't caught up yet, believe it or not. If you wanted a OS on your computer, you had to get Microsoft. So they ended up getting in some trouble because they were the only ones with a workable OS. A trust is when you have major companies combined that limit competition. So this happened or was attempted recently. AT&T, Verizon tried to merge. Antitrust laws blocked it because if they were allowed to merge, they would control like 75% of the cell phone coverage in the United States, and that would violate antitrust laws. Now, here's the thing. Would AT&T and Verizon merging, would that be A monopoly? No, because they're not the only, even if they merge and they're the biggest cell phone company, they're not the only cell phone company, because you'd still have Sprint, you'd still have T-Mobile, you'd still have Boost. While those may suck or not be as good, they're still competition. So let's look at US versus EC Knight. Here's a court case. It's not my favorite to teach. It is important to know, though. Not super important, but we'll go through the end and tell you what you really need to stress here and what you don't. Okay, so this says that when it comes to that Sherman Antitrust Act, it only applies to selling, not manufacturing, okay, to commerce, buying and selling, not manufacturing. So let me give you an example of this. It's okay for Sony to be the only one that makes the PlayStation 4. That's fine. That's their product. It's not okay for Sony to be the only one that sells the PlayStation 4. So if you want a PS4, I know most of y'all don't play games. Well, most of y'all do. A lot of y'all don't play games, but we can go a lot of places to get a PS4, right? We can go to Best Buy, we can go to Target, we can go to GameStop, we can go to Amazon, a bunch of places, but Sony is the only one making it. So it's okay. US versus EC Knight said this. Here's your textbook definition. It's okay for a company to be the only one to produce something. They can't be the only ones to sell something. So Microsoft used this as kind of a loophole in the 90s. Yes, they made and sold Windows, but they had other places like Walmart, Best Buy sell Windows as well. When I say Windows, that's an operating system. I'm sure most of y'all know that. So what is the number one reason for regulation? Is safety, usually, and it's looking out for the American people. We have the FDA, Food and Drug Administration. Before that, we had the Meat Inspection and Pure Food and Drug Act. Here's what happened. This guy, Upton Sinclair, went undercover into a meat packing facility, basically a butcher's shop, not a butcher's shop, but a slaughterhouse, and it transitions from the slaughterhouse to the butcher shop. What they found was cow piss, cow crap everywhere, bloody conditions. People weren't washing their hands. He was kind of like undercover boss here. He wrote a book called The Jungle, and it exposed all the nastiness in this industry. As a result, Teddy Roosevelt, who was a Republican, pushed for the Meat Inspection and Pure Food and Drug Act. Okay, so we wanted to make sure that when we got our food, our meat, it was clean, it was in the most suitable, the most cleanly conditions up on its preparation. I hope that makes sense. All this stuff with regulations here, the Sherman Antitrust Act, U.S. versus EC Knight, Upton Sinclair. This is Teddy Roosevelt, which is kind of misleading because he's a Republican, but he was a very hands-on government Republican. Push regulation, push safety. He was looking out for the consumer. That was his big thing, was consumer protection. All right, let's switch gears. We're going to go to the Federal Reserve Act. Okay, when it comes to money, there's two types of policy. There's in government. There's fiscal policy and there's monetary policy. So fiscal policy would be raising taxes, lowering taxes. The House would do that. When it comes to monetary policy, that's where the word money comes from. That is, how much money are we printing? How much money is in circulation? How many coins are we minting? All right, so the Federal Reserve handles monetary policy. Here you have Woodrow Wilson creates the Federal Reserve, usually called the Fed. It's a single place that is outside of the national bank in Washington, D.C. that prints all the money, mints all the coins. Now, later on, FDR would make a bunch of different little Federal Reserves, but the first Federal Reserve was Woodrow Wilson. They handle monetary policy, which is controlling the circulation of money. You print too much money, it causes inflation, prices go up, the dollar devalues. You don't print enough money, deflation can occur. Okay, so you don't want too much deflation because you want prices to be, I know you think you want everything to be cheap, but that's not always best for the economy, because if things cost more, they're taxed more, and that helps as well. although that's not, the number one goal is still the consumer. 16th Amendment, here's a big one. 16th Amendment says that federal income tax is legal. So it's okay for you to have to pay a federal income tax in addition to a state income tax. When you get your paycheck, a lot of y'all work. North Carolina takes money, and the U.S. government in D.C. takes money. Let's see. Budget and Accounting Act here. Warren G. Hardin. Okay, here's what this said pretty much, that when it comes to the budget, the House of Representatives are the true rulers of the federal budget. So when at the beginning of the year, the president comes up with his budget, the House comes up with their budget. If it's a Republican House, Republican president, that's usually going to be smooth. If it's divided government, some changes are going to have to be made. Some cuts are going to have to be made. Remember, OMB is also in the House, and it acts as a kind of a bridge to link the House and the White House. So OMB is the Office of Management Budget. So they're working between the two parties to try to organize the best budget for the government and the people. FLSA, Fair Labor and Standards Act. Okay, excuse me, I'm going to get some water. Okay, this is FDR. This creates the modern work environment. So if you work hourly, 40 hours per week, get paid time and a half for overtime. Excuse me. Prohibits child labor, creates minimum wage. The thing about minimum wage, you have to remember, if minimum wage goes up too high, it causes inflation. All right. Which is not, and everything goes up. The price of gas, the price of food, everything. World Trade Organization. So they basically keep track of trade deals like NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement, which is no tariffs between the U.S., Canada, and Mexico, which was Bill Clinton in the 90s. They make sure trade deals like that, they make sure tariffs are being followed. They basically regulate and more oversee world trade. Clean Air Act. This is Lyndon B. Johnson, federal law to control air pollution. Now, this makes sense here. This is a big liberal Democrat being very environmentalist, right? What you need to pay attention to here is this, because it's kind of tricky. Richard Nixon, who is a conservative Republican, created the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, which is a government bureaucracy that limits pollution and keeps the air clean. You wouldn't think a Republican would do that, but he did. Okay, moving right along. See how many we got here. This is a long section, guys. OSHA, Occupational Safety and Health Administration. Again, here's Richard Nixon, very hands-on for a Republican. The important thing you need to know about OSHA, it is a federal unfunded mandate. So it regulates the workplace. You work at Chick-fil-A, you go to the construction shop at the high school, they have OSHA regulations, okay? It's, hey, these rules have to be met in this workplace to keep it safe, or the federal government's going to shut it down. So since it's a federal unfunded mandate, the federal government gives no money to make sure these regulations, these rules are being followed. So if you're asked on the AP Gov exam in an FRQ to give an example of a federal unfunded mandate, OSHA is the best example you can give. And you see that right there in the notes that points it out. Let's see. Here, I'm going to try to make this a little better for you guys to see. All right, maybe this will help. Probably should have done this from the get-go. CBO, I just talked about it. Congressional Budget Office is a link between the House and the White House when it comes to the budget. Anything dealing with money is the House, right? You remember that. Okay, this just talks about how Clinton and Gingrich compromised on things during the 1990s. So here's why I'm telling you this. I want to give you this because it's an example of divided government working and compromising, which is something that hasn't happened since. So what ends up happening is Newt Gingrich, who you see here, toasting Hillary, is a conservative Republican. You know, Bill Clinton's a liberal Democrat. These two guys hate each other, but they respect each other, and they want to get crap done, unlike our government now. So here's what they did. Here's the type of compromises they would make. Clinton got a 10-year assault weapons ban, and then you had Newt Gingrich get to push welfare to work. So he got Bill Clinton to make people work for welfare. All right, so you had to be applying for jobs, you had to be actively looking for jobs, or if not, doing community service and volunteering to get welfare. You see, this led to 3.2% unemployment, the lowest it's ever been in American history. And that was a great time for our country in the 90s. And why? Because these two guys could compromise. Okay, here is tax policy. Uh, Redistributive policy. Basically, you tax the rich, give to the poor. It's Keynesian economic practice. It's a liberal theory, but still, that's kind of that's how the Democratic Party, the liberal Democrats, do it. It's not socialism unless it's done at an extreme level. Regressive tax, never used in the U.S. You make less, you pay more. That makes no sense. Look at distributive policy. It's supposed to benefit all Americans. That's not all policies in the United States do that. Very few do. All right, progressive tax. The more you make, the more they take. Now, Republicans and Democrats both do this. Democrats take more, but still with Republicans, if you make more, usually they take more. Now, they may take a lot less because of trickle down and all that kinds of stuff, but you know, the more money you make in this country, the higher taxes you're going to have to pay. All right, so let's look at the iron triangle. I'm going to slow down here because this is one of the most important things for you to know for your AP Gov test. Okay, so how does the iron triangle work as you see it defined here? The interest group, Congress, bureaucracy. So let's see how this would work for, let's say, Donald Trump's tax cut. Okay, I'm gonna say an interest group here can also be like a super PAC. We have a super PAC of millionaires and billionaires. Donald Trump promises them that, or he promises everybody that taxes will be cut. These super PACs like that because they're all billionaires, millionaires, lower taxes, better for them. So they work their butt off to get Trump elected. They do that. Trump gets elected. He sends this tax cut plan to the House, works with the House to create it. It passes the House, passes the Senate. The bureaucracy is the IRS implementing Trump's tax plan. All right, so interest group, let's say super PAC, pushes for the tax cut. Trump works with the House to make the tax cut. The IRS implements the tax cut. All right, so let's look at these kind of things. Rule, this is how the government will implement policy. So that's the bureaucracy. I just went over an iron triangle. It's the interest groups, Congress, bureaucracy. You can also say president here too. Issue network. So this is when you have a group make a coalition to try to pass something that wouldn't normally work together. So it's bipartisan. Remember, bipartisan means Democrats and Republicans work together. Partisan means that we got a big division. Republicans stick with their camp, Democrats stick with their camp. An issue network would be the two parties compromising to get something done and then disbanding once they get it done. All right, we're going to go to 8.2, talk 18.2. Sorry, talk about fiscal policy. But before we do, let's take a quick break here. Okay. Give me a minute. I'll be right back with you guys. You know, you can fast forward here. Okay. All right, so we're going to pick up with 18.2 here, fiscal policy. That is taxing and spending policy. Monetary, again, is the printing of money. So going to go back to the PowerPoint here in just a second. Okay, let me make this bigger so you guys can see it. Okay, fiscal policy, here we go. I just said this a million times. You can read, look at it. I don't think I need to say it again. Okay, inflation, deflation. We're going to go over some basic civic stuff here. Inflation, prices go up. Deflation, prices go down. The more debt Americans have, the more money that is printed, prices go up. If debt is reasonable, when the economy is good, people tend to borrow less, then prices go down, which is what the consumer wants. Let's talk about unemployment. You probably think you know what this is, and for the most part, you probably do, but there's a little bit more to it than you would think. First of all, the Bureau of Labor Statistics is the bureaucracy that tracks unemployment. Okay, so anytime you get the monthly jobs report, which says unemployment is blank percent, they work all month to compile this and they release a big report at the end of the year. They work with the president on this because guess what? If unemployment is high, the president is going to get killed in the media. He's going to get killed at the polls if he has to run for re-election. So the president works closely with the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Unemployment is the percentage of people not working. So you know that. Here's the tricky part. Underemployment. This is the percentage of people who have given up looking for work and they've been unemployed for more than 3 months. So they're not employed, but they've been unemployed for over 3 months and they're not actively putting in job applications. So they drop off of this unemployment report. So even though, say, the unemployment is 7.3%, which would be high, it's probably more like 10.3 because the underemployment's not being counted in that report. When Barack Obama come into office, unemployment was like 10.2. By the time he left, it was like 4.8. Trump has since got it down to like 4.3, 4.2. So this is the best unemployment has been since Clinton. So things are good in this department, which probably is why Donald Trump has it, despite all his flaws, has a good chance to win again in 2020. Tariffs, you know, this is a tax on an import. Let's take the Nintendo Switch. Nintendo's a Japanese company. Let's say the Nintendo Switch cost about the equivalent of $200 American dollars. It gets sent here. A tariff is taxed on it. So they don't sell the Switch here for $200 American dollars. Instead, they sell it for $300. That's to offset the tariff. Hope that makes sense. That's foreign produced goods, which is like everything in our country, had to be a little bit higher because the tariff that's been put on. That being said, they're still cheaper than American made products because to make things in America, you have to pay your workers so much money. An excise tax is a tax on unnecessary items, and it's usually at a higher rate. So beer, liquor, cigarettes, tobacco products, anything like that is taxed at a higher tax. That's called an excise tax. In the South, they call this a sin tax. Okay, let's look at the Whiskey Rebellion. You know that Shays' Rebellion demonstrated the weakness of the federal government. Whiskey Rebellion is the complete opposite. When George Washington was president, just became president, a group he had Hamilton as the Secretary of the Treasury, raised the tax on liquor and whiskey specifically. So people in Pennsylvania were irate. They're like, we shouldn't have to pay this extra money for our liquor. So they rioted, they protested, they became violent, they began pillaging, they began burning stuff down. And Washington's like, no, we're not having another Shays, not on my watch. He sends the army to Pennsylvania. They put down the rebellion. Whiskey Rebellion shows the strength of the federal government. An easy way to remember this is that whiskey is a strong drink. It shows the strength of the federal government. Not that anybody in here would know that. All right, Let's look at the deficit. This is not that complicated if you pay attention. You know, the national debt's the total amount of money that we have borrowed. I think we're $16 trillion in debt and counting. So we're a lot in debt. So how did this start? It started with FDR during the Great Depression. He implemented what's called deficit spending. Okay, what that means is we're spending money we don't have. Not a bad idea by FDR at the time. His idea was, let's spend money now to get America out of the Depression. Then when things start going well, which they did with the New Deal, what we will do is we'll quit deficit spending, or we'll rein it in. Problem is we never quit, and that's the reason why the debt's $16 trillion. Remember, any type of military spending and entitlement spending is 80% of the money we spend. Deficit is the difference between the money we spend and the money we make on taxes. So here's the different types of taxes. Sales tax, you know what that is. Some things have extra taxes like gas. You know, you got a gas tax when you go to fill your car up. You go and buy, whether it's a dress or whether you go and buy a comic book or a video game, you pay a sales tax on that. Tax expenditure. Let's see. Okay, basically, these are things that benefit companies if they're willing to do a certain thing. So, for example, Home Depot hires a lot of veterans because they get tax breaks and more money back on their taxes as a corporation, the more veterans they hire. Some plants have hired workers who are in prison release, who are there for lower tier felonies or misdemeanors. So they allow the inmates to work there. That company gets a tax break. Value added tax is kind of, all right, here's value added tax. It's a tough thing. All right. The best way to understand this is to take an item. So I'm going to take a taco here. All right. You've all ate at Taco Bell, whether you like it or not, you've ate there. Okay. So we got a taco. All right. We have the tortilla. Well, when you bought the tortillas, were they taxed? Yes. All right. We have the beef. When you bought the beef, was it taxed? Yes. We have the cheese. When you bought the cheese, was it taxed? Yes. That's all I like on my tacos, so I'm going to quit there. So then when it's sold at Taco Bell, a value-added tax says, why are we taxing it again? A value-added tax would be like, we taxed it when we bought the shell. We taxed it when we bought the beef. We taxed it when we bought the cheese, so we shouldn't tax it again. We don't have value-added tax in the United States. Republicans have pushed this, but I don't think it's ever going to happen. Some states don't have income tax. Texas doesn't have a state income tax, and there's a few others. I doubt you'll ever be asked that, but Republicans also believe in what's called a flat tax, which would be taxing every single person the same amount, let's say 10% of their yearly income, no matter how much they make. Okay. Monetarism. Let's see. I'm going to have to minimize out of that. Believes the government should control the money supply. And that's what happens. The Fed does this. They do it to try to promote economic growth and prevent inflation. Okay. Let's see. Let's look at these things here. Trade deficit. This is the difference between the goods we export versus the good we import. If we are importing more than we export, we're at a trade deficit. Mercantilism is Econ 101. You want to export more than you import. You want to sell more than you buy to make a profit. GATT, General Agreement on Tariffs and Trades. This is a 130-member coalition led by the U.S. and China. It's supposed to push lower tariffs and free trade. Donald Trump does not like this. NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement. Let's talk about NAFTA for a second, because this is extremely important here. NAFTA is one of the most controversial trade deals in the history of the United States, and it's recent when you talk about Bill Clinton. So here's what Bill Clinton did. he got rid of tariffs between the USA, so North America got rid of tariffs between the USA, Canada, and Mexico. So no tariffs when you ship goods from those three countries to one another. So for bigger corporations, this was no problem. In fact, it helped them because they were able to ship more goods to Mexico and Canada, and they benefited. Here's where it killed the economy. And this is why a lot of people in the South hate NAFTA. Mill jobs like that produce clothing, those kind of, I don't want to say lower class, but lower tier jobs left because of NAFTA. Because here's what happened. There, across from Mi Pueblitos, which is Los Tarascos now, there used to be a big Fruit of the Loom, which makes underwear and t-shirts, mill in Kings Mountain, and employed a couple hundred people. It was a big deal in Kings Mountain for 20 something 25 years. Well, after NAFTA, Fruit of the Loom shut down because here's what they figured. They would make these products in Kings Mountain because if they made them in, say, then they're still having to pay the import back into the United States or into Canada. So what that means is instead of paying that import fee, that tariff, let's just pay the workers here that money and we'll avoid tariffs altogether. When NAFTA was passed, these type of jobs went to Mexico. Since there was no longer a tariff, they're like, all right, we'll open a plant in Mexico. We'll pay the people $1 an hour to do it, and there won't be a tariff to ship it back into the United States or to Canada. So it killed like manufacturing and killed mill jobs. Donald Trump's trying to repeal NAFTA. Protectionism is basically enforcing tariffs to make sure people there. Protectionism, we're in a globalized economy, so it's not the best concept because if you raise tariffs on other countries raise tariffs on you, and you risk starting a trade war. All right, we're going to go to 18.3, regulating and deregulating. You know what regulation is? You can read it, not going to spend much time there. Trust, this is when companies can to limit competition. I went over earlier in this unit. Monopoly is when a company is the only one providing a good or service. I went over earlier in this unit. Environmental impact statement. Anytime you build something as a company, you have to have one of these. So let's say that Nike wants to open a new plant in Oregon. They have to give the government an environmental impact statement and say, how is this plant and the building of this plant going to impact the environment in Oregon? Deregulation, this is when you cut regulation, cut spending, cut taxes. Republicans do this. Not worried about CAB, not worried about Telecommunications Act of 96. Okay, here's some costs of regulation. Disrupts the open market, discourages competition, discourages tech advancement, may increase costs to the industry and consumer. Regulation's expensive. It has to be there to keep consumers safe. Too much is bad, though. Again, Republicans deregulate, Democrats regulate. Okay, that's it for that unit. So I'm going to go back through these and tell you the ones you absolutely have to know. So we'll either star these, double star them, or triple star them. All right. Star, you probably should know. Double star, make sure you study before the test. Triple star, memorize it if you want to pass the test. So here we go. 16th Amendment, triple star. You have to know this for the test, the AP Gov exam. WTO, star that one. OSHA, triple star. Make sure you know it's a federal unfunded mandate. CBO, triple star. Make sure you know it bridges the gap between the House and the President when it comes to the budget. Know what a progressive tax is. Star that. Iron Triangle, triple star. It will be on your test, I promise you. Know the difference between fiscal and monetary. Double star that one. If you don't know this, you shouldn't be in this class. Put a star here. Just look over this stuff. You got to know what these are: double start, tariffs, and excise tax. Whiskey Rebellion, star it, know it. Probably more likely to ask you about shays than whiskey. Know about deficit spending, star that. I'd star this, just basic. Probably not going to be on there though. NAFTA, triple star that. You have to know it. Mercantilism, triple star that. You have to know it. Protectionism, double star. Trust, star that. Monopoly, star that. Don't worry about CAB. Don't worry about Telecommunication Act of 96. Know the price of regulation, star that. Okay, so that's it for Unit 18. I hope this has been good for you. I hope you watched it and it helped you understand it. Email any questions you have about this unit to me at bsbell@clevelandcountyschools.org. bsbell@clevelandcountyschools.org. I'm trying to check my email here, see if you guys have any questions. Somebody says, please come back, save us. We can't do this. Help. True email I got. Okay. I'll see you guys later. Enjoy your week. It's a beautiful one. And study for this test.